Sarah Martinez was born in a small village near the Amazon rainforest in Brazil. Her mother, Elena, was part of an indigenous tribe that had lived in harmony with nature for centuries. But Sarah was different from the moment she took her first breath. Her eyes held an unusual golden color that seemed to glow in certain light, and strange markings appeared on her skin like tribal tattoos, though no one had painted them there. The village elders whispered among themselves. They had heard stories from their grandparents about children born with special gifts, children who could communicate with animals and understand the language of the forest. These children were both blessed and cursed, for there were others who sought them out for dark purposes. When Sarah was just 3 years old, her peaceful world shattered. Men in dark clothing arrived at their village during the night. They carried strange devices that beeped and flashed, pointing them at different people like they were searching for something specific. When they pointed their device at Sarah, it made loud, urgent sounds. Elena knew immediately what this meant. The stories her grandmother had told her were true. There were people who hunted children like Sarah, believing their blood and organs could give them special powers or cure diseases. These hunters had found their village, and they had found her daughter. That night, Elena packed only the essentials and fled into the jungle with Sarah. She knew the forest paths better than anyone, having grown up learning every tree, every stream, every hiding place. But the hunters were persistent and well-equipped. They had technology that could track people through the dense forest. For months, Elena and Sarah lived like animals, moving from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough to feel safe. They ate what they could find in the forest and drank from clean streams. Sarah learned to be completely silent when her mother signaled danger, even though she was barely old enough to understand why they were always running. The hunters caught up to them near a river. Elena heard their voices getting closer and knew they had only minutes. She made the hardest decision of her life. There was a missionary family, the Johnsons, who lived in a small compound about 2 miles away. Elena had seen them helping local people and believed they were good people. With tears streaming down her face, Elena ran through the jungle carrying Sarah. She could hear the hunters behind them, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like evil eyes. When she reached the missionary compound, she didn't have time to explain everything. She pressed Sarah into Mrs. Johnson's arms and whispered urgently in broken English, "Hide her. They hunt her. Keep safe." Before Mrs. Johnson could ask questions, Elena disappeared back into the jungle. The hunters followed her trail away from the compound. Elena led them on a chase that lasted 3 days before they finally caught her. She never revealed where Sarah was, even at the cost of her own life. The Johnsons tried to understand what had happened, but they only knew that this little girl needed protection from some kind of danger. They legally adopted Sarah and decided to leave Brazil for her safety. They moved to a small town in Montana, where they thought she could grow up normally. But the hunters had not forgotten about Sarah. As she grew older, the strange markings on her skin became more pronounced, and her golden eyes seemed to glow brighter. Animals were drawn to her in unusual ways. Birds would land on her shoulders, and wild deer would approach her without fear. She could sense when storms were coming hours before the weather changed. By the time Sarah was 12, she had learned to hide her abilities. The Johnsons had told her she was special, but warned her that some people might not understand. They moved frequently, always staying ahead of mysterious people who seemed to be asking questions about a girl matching Sarah's description. The pattern continued for years. Just when Sarah would start to feel settled in a new place, make friends, and begin to feel normal, the Johnsons would suddenly announce another move. She learned not to get too attached to anything or anyone because she knew it wouldn't last. When Sarah turned 16, she started having strange dreams. In these dreams, she could see her birth mother's face and hear her voice telling her to find someone who could help her understand her true nature. The dreams also showed her glimpses of the hunters, now older but still searching, still using their strange tracking devices. During her junior year of high school in a small town in Oregon, Sarah's worst fears came true. She was walking home from school when she noticed a black van following her. The same van had been parked near their house for 3 days. Sarah had developed keen instincts over the years, and every fiber of her being told her to run. She took a different route home, ducking through backyards and side streets. But the van found her anyway. 2 men got out, carrying those same beeping devices she remembered from her nightmares about her early childhood. Sarah ran faster than she had ever run before, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She made it home and told the Johnsons what had happened. That night, they packed their belongings once again. But this time was different. As they were loading their car in the darkness, they were surrounded. The hunters had found them, and there was nowhere left to run. The leader of the hunters, a tall man with cold gray eyes, approached them. He spoke calmly, as if he was discussing the weather. "We've been looking for her for a very long time. You've done well hiding her, but our technology has improved. Her unique genetic markers are impossible to hide now." Mrs. Johnson stepped protectively in front of Sarah. "She's just a normal girl. You've made a mistake." The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Normal girls don't make our sensors react like this. Normal girls don't have the genetic markers we've been tracking. She's coming with us." Sarah felt something awakening inside her, something she had always kept buried. The golden glow in her eyes intensified, and every animal within a mile radius began moving toward their location. The hunters' devices started malfunctioning, sparking, and making strange noises. In the chaos that followed, Sarah managed to escape into the forest. But she knew she couldn't run forever. She was 17 years old, alone, and being hunted by people with resources she couldn't imagine. The Johnsons had been captured, and she had no idea if they were still alive. For weeks, Sarah survived in the wilderness, using skills she didn't know she possessed. She could find food and clean water instinctively, and wild animals seemed to help her by bringing her information about approaching danger. But she was getting weaker, and winter was coming. One cold morning, exhausted and nearly out of hope, Sarah stumbled upon a small auto repair shop on the outskirts of a tiny mountain town. Smoke was rising from the chimney, and she could hear the sound of someone working inside. She had no choice but to take the risk and ask for help. She approached the shop cautiously, ready to run if necessary. Through the window, she could see a man in his 30s working on an old truck engine. His hands were covered in grease, and he was completely focused on his work. There was something about him that felt different from other people, something that made her animal instincts tell her he might be safe. Sarah stood outside the shop for nearly an hour, watching and listening. The man worked alone, and there were no signs of the technology the hunters used. Finally, cold and desperate, she knocked on the door. When the man opened it, their eyes met, and Sarah saw something she hadn't seen in any adult's face for a long time. Genuine kindness without any hidden agenda. The man's name was Jake Thompson, and he was about to become the most important person in Sarah's life. Jake saw a teenage girl who was obviously in trouble. She was thin, dirty, and her clothes were torn from weeks in the wilderness. But there was something else about her, something in her unusual golden eyes that told him she was running from something far worse than typical teenage problems. "Are you okay?" Jake asked gently, not making any sudden movements that might scare her away. Sarah had practiced this moment in her mind many times, but now that it was happening, she didn't know what to say. How could she explain that she was being hunted by people who wanted to use her genetic differences for unknown purposes? How could she tell him about her mother's sacrifice or her adoptive parents' capture? Instead, she simply said, "I need help. There are bad people looking for me, and I don't have anywhere else to go." Jake looked into her eyes and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Come inside. We'll figure this out." As Sarah stepped into the warm shop, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. She didn't know that Jake Thompson had his own reasons for distrusting authority figures, his own history of helping people who needed to disappear. She didn't know that his small auto repair shop was actually a front for something much more complex. But the hunters were still out there, and they were getting closer. Sarah's brief moment of safety was about to be tested in ways she couldn't imagine. The real challenge was just beginning. Jake Thompson had not always been a small-town mechanic. 20 years earlier, he had been Staff Sergeant Jake Thompson, working in military intelligence for a special operations unit that most people never knew existed. His job had been to protect assets and extract people from dangerous situations around the world. He had seen things that haunted his dreams and done things he preferred not to remember. After a mission went wrong in Eastern Europe, resulting in the deaths of innocent civilians, Jake had walked away from military life completely. He wanted nothing more than to live quietly, fix engines, and never again be responsible for another person's life or death. The auto repair shop in the mountains of Montana was his attempt at peace. But the moment Sarah walked into his shop, Jake's protective instincts activated like a switch being flipped. He recognized the look in her eyes because he had seen it in war zones. The expression of someone who had been running from death for so long they had almost forgotten what safety felt like. Jake gave Sarah food and clean clothes and set up a small cot in the back room of his shop. He didn't ask too many questions at first, sensing that she needed time to trust him. But over the next few days, as Sarah slowly opened up about her situation, Jake realized she was in far more danger than he had initially thought. The hunter Sarah described sounded like a private military contractor, or worse, a black ops organization with serious resources and technology. When she mentioned tracking devices and genetic markers, Jake's blood ran cold. He had heard whispers about such groups during his military days, organizations that operated outside any government oversight, pursuing projects that most people would consider science fiction. 3 days after Sarah's arrival, Jake's suspicions were confirmed in the worst possible way. He was working under the hood of a pickup truck when he heard the sound of multiple vehicles approaching his shop. Through the window, he saw 3 black SUVs pulling into his parking lot in a formation that immediately told him these were not ordinary customers. Jake moved quickly, but calmly, activating protocols he had hoped never to use again. He pressed a hidden button under his workbench that locked all the doors and windows of his shop with reinforced steel barriers. Another button activated a communication jamming system that would block any tracking devices or radio signals. "Sarah," he called quietly, "we have company. Get into the safe room." Now, Sarah emerged from the back room where she had been reading and immediately understood the situation when she saw Jake's expression. She had learned to read danger in people's faces long ago. Jake led her to what looked like a supply closet, but when he opened it and moved aside some shelves, it revealed a hidden room equipped with supplies, communications equipment, and enough food and water for several weeks. "Whatever happens," Jake told her, sealing her inside, "don't come out until I give you the all-clear signal. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. If you don't hear that signal within 24 hours, use the radio in there to contact the frequency I've written on the wall. Tell them Thompson needs extraction protocol 7. The hunters surrounded Jake's shop within minutes. Their leader was the same cold-eyed man who had cornered the Johnson family. He approached the shop's reinforced door and spoke through a speaker system. "Mr. Thompson, we know you're harboring someone who belongs to us. Make this easy on yourself and hand her over. We have no quarrel with you." Jake activated his own speaker system. "I'm just a mechanic. I don't know what you're talking about. We've tracked her genetic signature to this location. Our sensors indicate she's inside your building right now. You have 60 seconds to open this door before we open it ourselves." Jake had anticipated this moment from the day he opened his shop. Every wall was reinforced with steel plates hidden behind ordinary-looking wood paneling. The windows were bulletproof glass, disguised to look normal. His seemingly simple auto repair shop was actually a fortress. "Then, I guess you'd better get started," Jake replied. What followed was unlike anything the small mountain town had ever experienced. The hunters came equipped with military-grade weapons and explosives, but Jake's defenses held. More importantly, Jake fought back with skills the hunters hadn't expected from a simple mechanic. Using hidden passages built into his shop structure, Jake moved through the building like a ghost, striking at the hunters and disappearing before they could respond. He had weapons caches hidden throughout the shop and surveillance systems that let him track every intruder's movement. The battle lasted 6 hours. By the end of it, the hunters had lost half their team and still hadn't breached Jake's inner defenses. Their leader, frustrated and running low on ammunition, made a decision that revealed just how valuable Sarah was to them. He contacted his superiors and requested backup. Within 2 hours, helicopters appeared on the horizon, carrying reinforcements and heavier weapons. Jake realized that his fortress, impressive as it was, wouldn't hold against a full military assault. But Jake had one more card to play. During his military service, he had made friends with people who operated outside official channels, people who owed him favors and shared his distrust of organizations that hunted innocent civilians. He activated an emergency beacon and waited. The reinforcements arrived just as the hunters were preparing to breach his defenses with explosives. But instead of more hunters, these new arrivals were Jake's former teammates from his special operations days. They surrounded the hunter's position and gave them a choice: leave immediately or face overwhelming force. The hunter's leader found himself outgunned and outmaneuvered. He had expected to capture one teenage girl and deal with one retired soldier. Instead, he was facing a coordinated defense by some of the most skilled operators in the world. "This isn't over, Thompson," he said through the radio as his team retreated. "She's too valuable for us to simply give up. We'll find another way." "Then, I guess we'll be ready for you," Jake replied. After the hunters disappeared, Jake's friends helped him assess the damage and plan their next move. Sarah emerged from the safe room shaken, but unharmed. She stared at Jake with new understanding. "You're not really just a mechanic, are you?" she asked. Jake sat down heavily, suddenly feeling every one of his 43 years. "I used to be someone else, someone I didn't like very much. I came here to forget about that person." One of Jake's friends, a woman named Maria Santos, approached them. She had been a military intelligence officer and understood situations like this better than most. "Jake, they're not going to stop," Maria said. "This girl has something they want badly enough to risk a full assault on your position. We need to understand what we're really dealing with." Over the next few hours, Sarah told them everything she remembered about her childhood, her mother's sacrifice, and the years of running with the Johnson family. Maria took notes and made phone calls to contacts in various intelligence agencies, trying to piece together the truth. What she discovered made everyone in the room fall silent. Sarah's genetic markers indicated she was descended from a bloodline that certain organizations believed held the key to enhancing human abilities. Her unusual connection with animals and her intuitive understanding of natural patterns were just the beginning of what she might be capable of. "There are people who think her DNA could be used to create enhanced soldiers or cure genetic diseases," Maria explained. "They're not just hunting her for what she can do now, but for what her genetic information might allow them to create in a laboratory." Jake felt a familiar rage building inside him, the same anger that had driven him to leave the military. So they're treating her like a lab rat, like she's not even human. To them, she's not, Maria said sadly. She's a resource to be harvested. Sarah listened to this conversation with growing horror, finally understanding why her mother had died and why she could never have a normal life. But instead of despair, she felt determination growing inside her. "Then we need to make sure they never get what they want," she said quietly. "We need to stop them permanently." Jake looked at her with respect. Despite everything she had been through, Sarah wasn't asking to be rescued. She was asking to fight back. "That's going to be dangerous," Jake warned. "These people have unlimited resources and no morals. Once we start fighting them actively, there's no going back to a quiet life." Sarah smiled, and for the first time, Jake saw not a frightened teenager, but a young woman who had inherited her mother's courage. "I haven't had a quiet life since the day I was born," she said. At least this way, I'm choosing to fight instead of just running. Maria nodded approvingly. We'll need to gather intelligence first. Find out exactly which organization is behind this and what their ultimate goals are. Then, we can start dismantling their operations. Jake realized his peaceful retirement was over. But, as he looked at Sarah's determined face, he knew he had found something more important than peace, a purpose worth fighting for. The hunters had made a critical mistake. By forcing Jake to reveal his true capabilities, they had turned a simple mechanic into an active enemy. And Jake Thompson, when he decided to fight, was far more dangerous than they could have imagined. Over the next few weeks, Jake's shop became the headquarters for a small, but highly skilled group of people dedicated to protecting Sarah and stopping the organization that hunted her. They included former military personnel, intelligence operatives, and even some scientists who understood the genetic research Sarah's hunters were pursuing. Sarah began training with Jake and his team, learning not just how to defend herself, but how to use her unique abilities strategically. They discovered that her connection with animals could provide early warning systems, and that her intuitive understanding of natural patterns made her exceptionally good at predicting enemy movements. But the hunters were also adapting. They had learned that Sarah was no longer alone and defenseless. Their next attempt to capture her would be far more sophisticated and dangerous than anything they had tried before. 6 months after the attack on Jake's shop, Sarah Martinez had transformed from a frightened teenager into a skilled operative. Under Jake's guidance, she had learned combat techniques, surveillance methods, and, most importantly, how to use her unique abilities as tactical advantages rather than hiding them in fear. The team Jake had assembled had grown into a sophisticated network of former military personnel, scientists, and even some government agents who disagreed with unauthorized genetic research programs. They called themselves the Sanctuary Project, and their mission was simple: protect people like Sarah and expose the organizations that hunted them. Through careful intelligence gathering, they had identified their enemy. The group hunting Sarah was called Helix Corporation, a private research company that operated under multiple government contracts while pursuing their own illegal agenda. Helix specialized in genetic enhancement programs and had been collecting people with unusual genetic markers for over 30 years. Maria Santos had infiltrated Helix's computer systems and discovered something horrifying. Sarah was not the only person they were hunting. Helix had files on dozens of individuals around the world, all with unique genetic traits that the corporation wanted to study, harvest, or weaponize. Even worse, they discovered what had happened to Sarah's adoptive parents, the Johnsons. They were being held in a Helix research facility in Colorado, where they were being used as leverage to force Sarah to surrender. The corporation's plan was simple: make Sarah come to them by threatening the people she cared about. "We can't let them keep using innocent people as bait," Sarah said during one of their planning sessions. "How many other families have they destroyed because of people like me?" Jake had been studying Helix's facility schematics for weeks. The Colorado installation was heavily defended and located in a remote mountain area. A direct assault would be suicide, but Jake had never been one to use direct approaches when cleverness would work better. "We're not going to attack them," Jake announced. "We're going to make them attack us, but on our terms and at a place of our choosing." Jake's plan was audacious and dangerous. They would leak false information through Helix's communication systems, making them believe Sarah was hiding at an abandoned military base in Nevada. The base had been decommissioned years earlier, but still contained extensive underground facilities that Jake and his team could modify for their needs. While Helix prepared for what they thought would be a simple extraction operation, Jake's team spent weeks turning the abandoned base into an elaborate trap. They used Sarah's abilities to recruit local wildlife as an early warning system, set up defensive positions throughout the underground tunnels, and installed equipment that would jam Helix's tracking devices. Most importantly, they prepared a surprise that would expose Helix's illegal activities to the world. Maria had contacts in several international news organizations who were prepared to broadcast evidence of Helix's genetic hunting program as soon as they received the signal. Sarah insisted on being the bait, despite Jake's objections. "They're coming for me anyway," she argued. "At least this way, we control when and where it happens." The confrontation came on a cold morning in November. Helix arrived with overwhelming force. 3 helicopters, armored vehicles, and over 40 personnel equipped with military-grade weapons and the latest tracking technology. Their leader, the same cold-eyed man who had been hunting Sarah for years, was confident that this time there would be no escape. What they found instead was the fight of their lives. Jake's team had turned the abandoned base into a maze of defensive positions and hidden passages. Every corridor contained surprises. Every room held potential ambush points. The battle that followed became a masterclass in asymmetric warfare. Sarah moved through the underground tunnels like a ghost, using her connection with animals to coordinate attacks and gather intelligence. Ravens served as her eyes in the sky, warning her of enemy movements. Even a local coyote population seemed to understand that she needed their help. Jake and his team picked off Helix operatives one by one, using their superior knowledge of the base layout to strike and disappear. Every time Helix thought they had cornered their targets, they found themselves walking into another trap. But Helix had not come unprepared. They had brought new technology specifically designed to counter Sarah's abilities, electromagnetic devices that disrupted her connection with animals, and sensors that could track her unique genetic signature even through solid rock. The battle reached its climax in the base's central command center, where Sarah found herself face-to-face with Helix's leader for the first time in years. He had cornered her in a room with no other exits, and his tracking device indicated that her genetic signature was stronger than ever. "You've cost us a great deal of time and resources," he said, pointing a weapon at her. "But it ends now. You're coming with us, and your friends will stop interfering with our work." Sarah looked at him calmly, no longer the frightened child who had hidden in the forest years ago. "You're right about one thing. This does end now." What happened next shocked everyone in the room. Sarah's golden eyes began to glow brighter than they ever had before, and every piece of electronic equipment in the facility started malfunctioning. The electromagnetic devices Helix had brought to counter her abilities overloaded and caught fire. More importantly, the signal boosters Maria had hidden throughout the base activated simultaneously, broadcasting live video and audio of the confrontation to news outlets around the world. The Helix leader found himself on international television, holding a weapon on a young woman while discussing illegal genetic research programs. "The whole world is watching now," Sarah said quietly. "Everyone can see what you really are." Jake and his team burst into the command center at that moment, having fought their way through the remaining Helix operatives. The battle was over, and Helix had lost far more than they had gained. Within hours, the international outcry was enormous. Governments that had been turning a blind eye to Helix's activities suddenly found themselves facing public demands for investigations. The corporation's stock price collapsed, their government contracts were suspended, and law enforcement agencies around the world began coordinating efforts to shut down their operations. But the most satisfying moment came when Jake and Sarah arrived at the Colorado facility to free the Johnsons and the other prisoners Helix had been holding. The facility was already being evacuated as the corporation tried to destroy evidence of their activities. Sarah found Mr. and Mrs. Johnson in a holding cell, weak from months of captivity, but alive. When Mrs. Johnson saw her, she began crying with relief. "We never told them where you were," Mrs. Johnson said. "We knew you were safe with good people." "I know," Sarah replied, hugging the woman who had raised her. "You taught me how to recognize good people. That's how I knew Jake could be trusted." The Helix leader, whose name turned out to be Dr. Marcus Webb, was arrested along with dozens of his associates. During his trial, the full extent of Helix's activities was revealed. They had been operating illegal research programs in 12 countries, had kidnapped over 200 people with unusual genetic traits, and had conducted experiments that violated every international law regarding human rights. Sarah testified at Dr. Webb's trial, no longer hiding her abilities, but speaking openly about what it meant to be born different in a world where some people saw difference as something to exploit rather than celebrate. My mother died protecting me from people like Dr. Webb, she told the court. She believed that every person has the right to live freely, regardless of what makes them unique. I'm here today because other people chose to continue that protection when I couldn't protect myself. Dr. Webb was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Helix Corporation was dissolved, and its assets were used to compensate victims and fund legitimate genetic research programs focused on helping people rather than exploiting them. Jake returned to his auto repair shop, but it had become something much more than a simple garage. The Sanctuary Project continued operating, helping other people with unusual abilities find safety and community. Sarah became one of their primary coordinators, using her skills and experience to identify others who needed protection. 5 years after that first desperate night, when Sarah knocked on Jake's door, she stood in the same shop, but everything had changed. She was now 22 years old, confident and capable, with a clear sense of her purpose in the world. Jake was working on a truck engine, just as he had been the day they met. But now Sarah worked alongside him, having learned that she had a natural talent for understanding mechanical systems, just as she understood natural ones. "Do you ever miss the quiet life?" Sarah asked, wiping grease from her hands. Jake smiled, the genuine smile of someone who had found peace, not through isolation, but through purpose. "I thought I wanted quiet, but what I really wanted was to feel like my life meant something. Helping people like you, stopping people like Webb, that means something." Through the shop's windows, they could see other members of the Sanctuary Project arriving for their weekly meeting. Former military personnel, scientists, people with unusual abilities, and ordinary citizens who believed that everyone deserved protection from those who would exploit them. Sarah had learned that her genetic markers were not a curse to be hidden, but a gift to be shared responsibly. She now helped train other people with similar abilities, teaching them not just how to hide from hunters, but how to use their gifts to make the world better. The golden glow in her eyes had never dimmed, but now it represented hope rather than fear. Animals still gathered around her, but now they came seeking comfort rather than offering protection. Children in the local town knew her as the woman who could make birds sing and convince lost pets to come home. The scars of her childhood would always remain, but Sarah had learned that survival was not enough. True victory meant creating a world where the next child born with unusual abilities would never have to run in fear, would never have to watch their parents sacrifice everything for their safety. Jake Thompson had thought his fighting days were over when he left the military. But he had discovered that the most important battles were not fought between nations, but between those who protected the innocent and those who would exploit them. The Sanctuary Project had grown from a desperate defense of one teenager into an international network that monitored genetic research programs, helped people with unusual abilities integrate safely into society, and worked with law enforcement agencies to prevent organizations like Helix from operating. Sarah Martinez was no longer the frightened child who had stumbled out of the forest seeking help. She was now a leader, a protector, and a symbol of hope for people who had been taught to see themselves as nothing more than genetic resources to be harvested. The hunters had been stopped, their organization destroyed, and their leader imprisoned. But more importantly, the hunted had learned to fight back, to protect each other, and to build something better than the world that had tried to destroy them. In the end, Sarah had found something more valuable than safety. She had found a family of choice, a purpose worth fighting for, and the knowledge that no one ever had to face the darkness alone as long as people like Jake Thompson existed in the world, ready to transform their workshops into fortresses and their retirement into a calling to protect those who needed protection most.